There is a moment in military history when a weapon stops being a concept and becomes a reality. That moment is usually hidden from the public, buried under layers of classification, budget codes, and carefully crafted denial. But history has shown us, time and again, that secrets of this magnitude rarely stay buried forever. For over a decade, the United States government has been quietly, methodically, and with extraordinary financial investment, developing and testing a category of weapon that could fundamentally alter the nature of modern warfare. Not in the science fiction sense that defense contractors love to pitch to congressional committees, but in a deeply practical, operational sense that has already begun shifting the strategic calculations of every major military power on Earth. We are talking about directed energy weapons. More specifically, the family of technologies that includes high-energy laser systems, high-power microwave weapons, and the electronic warfare platforms that operate at the intersection of both. And when we look carefully at what the public record actually shows, through declassified documents, congressional testimonies, defense industry reports, and investigative journalism, the picture that emerges is not one of distant futuristic prototypes. It is one of systems that have already been tested in real operational environments, systems that have quietly moved from the laboratory to the battlefield without the public debate that a shift of this magnitude arguably deserves. The United States has been working on directed energy technology since at least the 1980s, when the Strategic Defense Initiative, popularly known as Star Wars, captured the public imagination and generated enormous controversy. But the modern chapter of this story, the one that involves serious, sustained, operational testing, begins roughly around 2013 and 2014, when the Pentagon began allocating significant and growing portions of its research budget to what internal documents began calling directed energy transition programs. The goal was no longer to research whether these weapons could work in theory. The goal was to figure out how to actually use them in combat. And that shift from research to deployment is where everything gets interesting, and frankly, where everything gets concerning. If you have never looked into this topic before, stick with me, because what the documents actually say, what the experts actually testify, and what the evidence actually shows is considerably more significant than anything you will find in a typical headline about laser weapons. This is not a story about a cool gadget. This is a story about a fundamental transformation in how military power is projected, and about the questions that transformation raises that nobody in Washington seems particularly eager to answer. Let us build the factual foundation first, because this subject is so saturated with speculation and sensationalism that it is essential to anchor ourselves in what is actually documented before we start drawing conclusions. The Congressional Research Service, which produces nonpartisan analysis for members of Congress, published a detailed report on directed energy weapons in 2023, authored by analyst Kelly M. Saylor, titled Defense Primer Directed Energy Weapons. That document confirms that the Department of Defense has active directed energy programs across all major branches of the military, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. It also confirms that several of these systems have already moved beyond the testing phase and into what the military calls operational employment, meaning they have been used, or at minimum deployed for use, in real-world military contexts. The Army's high-energy laser mobile demonstrator, known as the HALE-MD, was tested as early as 2013 at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, where it successfully intercepted mortar rounds and unmanned aerial vehicles. That is not a rumor. That is documented in official Army press releases and confirmed in reporting by outlets, including Defense News and Popular Mechanics. By 2019, the Army had progressed to what it called the High Energy Laser Tactical Vehicle Demonstrator, a 100-kilowatt class system mounted on a heavy, expanded mobility tactical truck. And that system underwent testing that produced results the Army described in its own documentation as exceeding expectations. The Navy has its own parallel track. The laser weapon system, known as LAWS, was deployed aboard the USS Ponce in 2014, making it the first directed energy weapon in history to be deployed operationally by the United States military. The Naval Sea Systems Command confirmed that it was not just a demonstrator. It was a system authorized for use by the ship's commanding officer. Video footage of Laws in operation was officially released by the Navy in 2014, and it showed the system destroying small boats and drone targets. That footage is publicly available. It is not classified. And yet, the broader public conversation about what that deployment actually meant, about what comes next, about the doctrinal implications, largely never happened. The Air Force has been working on airborne directed energy systems, including the Self-Protect High-Energy Laser Demonstrator, known as SHIELD, which is designed to protect aircraft from surface-to-air and air-to-air missile threats using a laser mounted on a pod. Testing of SHIELD components has been confirmed through official Air Force releases and reporting from Aviation Week and Space Technology. And then there is the program that has drawn less public attention, but arguably represents the most consequential development: high-power microwave weapons, sometimes called counter-electronics systems. The most prominent of these is the Counter-Electronics High-Power Microwave Advanced Missile Project, known as CHAMP, developed by Boeing and the Air Force Research Laboratory. CHAMP is designed to fly over a target area and emit pulses of microwave energy, powerful enough to disable electronic systems, essentially frying computers, communications equipment, and weapons guidance systems without a conventional explosive. A flight test conducted in 2012 at the Utah Test and Training Range successfully disabled multiple electronic targets in sequence. That test was confirmed publicly by Boeing and by the Air Force Research Laboratory, and it was described by Program Manager Keith Coleman as a huge victory for the Air Force. CHAMP has continued to be developed and tested in the years since, with updates provided through defense industry reporting and congressional budget justifications, though the operational details remain classified. This is the factual baseline: systems that work, systems that have been tested, systems that have been deployed. The question is, where are they now, and what are they capable of today? If you are finding this useful, if this is the kind of content that actually breaks down what is happening behind the news cycle, take a second right now and subscribe. Because we go this deep on every single topic we cover, and there is a lot more coming that you do not want to miss. One of the most reliable ways to understand what a government is actually prioritizing, as opposed to what it says it is prioritizing, is to follow the money. Defense budgets are public documents, and while the classified portions are obviously redacted, the overall figures and program categories are available for anyone willing to dig through the tables in the President's budget request. What the numbers show is unambiguous. According to data compiled by the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, a Washington-based think tank that produces nonpartisan and defense policy analysis, funding for directed energy programs within the Department of Defense grew from approximately $535 million in fiscal year 2017 to over $1 billion in fiscal year 2022. That is not incremental growth. That is a doubling of investment in 5 years. And it tracks precisely with the period during which the military was described in official documents as transitioning from science and technology development to engineering and manufacturing development, which is the phase that immediately precedes operational deployment. The fiscal year 2024 budget request included over $1.3 billion across all military branches for directed energy programs, according to analysis by the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, which reviewed the detailed program elements within the budget justification documents. The Army alone requested funding for multiple laser programs at different power levels, from the 50-kilowatt class systems intended for short-range air defense to the emerging 300-kilowatt class systems that represent the next threshold in capability. That 300-kilowatt threshold matters enormously. Military researchers and weapons physicists have consistently identified 100 kilowatts as the level at which a laser becomes genuinely lethal against a meaningful range of tactical targets, including cruise missiles, artillery shells, and small aircraft. The 300 kilowatt level represents the point at which such a weapon becomes capable of threatening more hardened targets at greater distances. The fact that the Defense Department is now funding development of systems at that power level is not a statement about future plans. It is a statement about near-term operational intent. The DARPA budget, which funds more speculative and longer-horizon research, has consistently included directed energy programs as well, including work on what the agency has described as compact, efficient, and high-brightness laser sources, which is engineer speak for making these weapons smaller, cheaper, and more powerful simultaneously. DARPA's annual reports, which are public documents, confirm this investment stream. But the money does not reveal directly, and this is important, is how much is being spent on programs that remain entirely classified. The Department of Defense maintains what it calls special access programs, which are classified programs that require specific authorization even for members of Congress to access. It is a reasonable inference, supported by the general pattern of how advanced military technology has historically been developed, that some of the most capable directed energy systems currently in existence are not reflected in the public budget figures at all. This is not speculation for its own sake. It is an acknowledgement that we are working with an incomplete picture, and that the picture we do have is already significant. There is a significant gap between how directed energy weapons are typically described in popular coverage and what they actually do in operational terms. The popular image is a laser that vaporizes things in a flash of cinematic light. The operational reality is considerably more nuanced, and in some ways considerably more concerning. High-energy laser weapons work by delivering sustained thermal energy to a specific point on a target. The physics are straightforward. A powerful enough laser beam, held on a target long enough, will heat that target to the point of structural failure or detonation. For a drone with a composite plastic body, that might take a few seconds. For a mortar round in flight, it might take slightly longer. For a hardened missile with a metal body, it requires significantly more power and dwell time, which is why the push toward higher kilowatt systems is so directly tied to expanding the range of threats these weapons can address. The key operational advantages are significant. First, the cost per engagement is extraordinarily low. A single shot from a high-energy laser costs roughly $1 in electricity compared to the cost of an interceptor missile, which can range from tens of thousands to over $1 million, depending on the system. Against the current threat environment, which involves adversaries capable of producing large numbers of relatively cheap drones and rockets, this cost asymmetry represents a potential strategic revolution. The Israeli Iron Dome system, which has been celebrated for its effectiveness, costs approximately $50,000 per interception. A laser system capable of performing the same function at $1 per engagement changes the entire economic calculus of air defense. Second, directed energy weapons have what military planners call a deep magazine. A conventional ship or battery has a finite number of missiles. When those missiles are expended, the system is combat ineffective until it can be resupplied, which in a high-intensity conflict could take days or weeks. A laser system, as long as it has access to power, can engage unlimited targets. This is not a theoretical advantage. It is a practical, operational capability that defense planners have been actively designing around for the past decade. Third, speed of light targeting. Laser weapons travel at the speed of light, which means that for targets within effective range, there is effectively no flight time and no requirement to lead a moving target with a predictive solution in the way that a kinetic weapon requires. This makes them particularly effective against fast-moving threats. The limitations are also real and documented. Atmospheric conditions degrade laser performance significantly. Dust, humidity, rain, and smoke all scatter and absorb laser energy, reducing effective range and increasing the time required to achieve the desired effect on target. This is not a minor inconvenience. It is an operational constraint that has driven significant research investment into what are called adaptive optics systems, which attempt to compensate for atmospheric distortion in real time. Progress has been made, as documented in publications from the SPI, the International Society for Optics and Photonics, which hosts peer-reviewed research on directed energy technology, but the atmospheric challenge remains a genuine constraint. High-power microwave weapons operate on a different principle entirely. Rather than thermal effects on the surface of a target, they work by inducing electrical currents inside electronic systems, currents powerful enough to destroy transistors, circuit boards, and other sensitive components. The effects are invisible and silent. A vehicle, aircraft, or missile guidance system subjected to sufficient high-power microwave energy will simply stop working. This characteristic, the ability to defeat a target without any visible evidence of the weapon being employed, has obvious implications for military operations and for the attribution of hostile acts. The combination of these technologies, high-energy lasers for physical destruction and high-power microwave weapons for electronic defeat, represents a directed energy capability that covers a remarkably broad range of target types and operational scenarios. And that combination is precisely what the documented U.S. programs have been pursuing in parallel. It would be a mistake to analyze U.S. directed energy development in isolation, because the programs make considerably more sense when understood as a response to, and a competition with, parallel development by strategic adversaries. The United States is not operating in a vacuum. It is operating in an environment where both China and Russia have made directed energy weapons a declared national priority. China's directed energy programs have been documented extensively by the U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission, which is a statutory body created by Congress to monitor China's military and economic development. The Commission's annual reports, which are public documents available on its website, have repeatedly flagged Chinese investment in directed energy technology as a significant concern. The 2022 report specifically noted that China has demonstrated ground-based laser weapons and is developing airborne and space-based directed energy systems. It also noted that China's Strategic Support Force, the branch of the People's Liberation Army responsible for space, cyber, and electronic warfare operations, has incorporated directed energy capabilities into its operational doctrine. A 2019 report by the Air Force's National Air and Space Intelligence Center, portions of which were made public, confirmed that China had already deployed ground-based laser weapons capable of targeting satellites in low Earth orbit. This is not a hypothetical future capability. It is a present operational capability that the U.S. intelligence community has documented and assessed. Russia's directed energy programs are equally documented. The Russian military has officially acknowledged the development and deployment of a system called Peresvet, which Russian officials describe as a combat laser system. President Vladimir Putin announced Peresvet publicly during his 2018 address to the Federal Assembly, displaying video footage of the system and describing it as capable of defeating targets at the speed of light. The specifics of Peresvet's capabilities remain unclear, but its existence as a deployed system has been confirmed by Russian official statements and by U.S. intelligence assessments reflected in congressional testimonies. The Pentagon's own annual report to Congress on Chinese military power, produced by the Office of the Secretary of Defense, has consistently highlighted directed energy as one of the key technological domains where China is seeking to achieve parity or superiority with the United States. The 2023 edition of that report, which covers Chinese military developments through 2022, describes China's goal of achieving mechanized, informatized, and intelligentized warfare, a formulation that explicitly encompasses directed energy and electronic warfare capabilities. This geopolitical context matters because it explains why the pace of U.S. directed energy development has accelerated so dramatically over the past decade. It is not simply a case of American military planners exploring interesting technology. It is a response to a documented threat from adversaries who are developing comparable and potentially superior capabilities. The strategic logic is straightforward and has been articulated clearly in official documents, including the National Defense Strategy of 2022, which identifies China as the pacing challenge for U.S. military planning and which specifically highlights the importance of investing in advanced technologies to maintain competitive advantage. Now, before we get to the part of this conversation that I actually think is the most important, let me ask you something. If you have learned something in the last few minutes that you did not know before, hit the like button. Not because it helps some algorithm, though it does, but because it tells us that this kind of deep, documented, serious analysis is what you actually want to see. And if you have a thought about what we are discussing, something you agree with, something you question, something you want us to dig into further, leave it in the comments. This conversation is more useful when you are part of it.